For this video, I want to go through a sample Schedule 8812 to claim the child tax credit for 2024. So we have a sample 8812 here, and it is part of a full 1040 for this taxpayer. So we'll have a look at the 8812 and all the other pages and schedules within the 1040 that are going to be required. But before we get into that, I have just one slide here covering some background on the CTC, what are the amounts, and then some more detail on the fact pattern. So this child tax credit for 2024, we mean the 2024 tax year. So these are returns that are being filed in 2025. Now the credit amount is $2,000 per qualifying child, and the child has to be under 17 at the end of the year. The $2,000 amount remains unchanged from last year. The one thing that has changed from 2023 is the additional child tax credit amount. So the ACTC is the refundable portion of the child tax credit, and that has increased to $1,700 for 2024. Last year it was $1,600, and then the year prior to that in 2022 is $1,500. So the $2,000 amount remains unchanged, but the refundable portion has been increasing by $100 over the last few years. Now, in order to claim this credit, your child has to meet the standard of what is considered a qualifying child for child tax credit purposes. And this is an important distinction because there is a difference from having a qualifying child as just a dependent, right? It's certainly possible, and it often happens, where you'll have a child that meets the dependency tests, but they're not going to meet the qualifying child test for the child tax credit purposes, and very often it has to do with the age. So the age is the big one that surprises a lot of parents. Your child has to be under 17 at the end of the year to be eligible for this credit. So if they're 17 or they're 18, still in high school, living at home, you're still supporting them, they don't qualify for this credit, right? So the child tax credit is not available, but the other dependent credit would be, most likely. So in addition to the age test, there's these other various tests that they must meet, right? The child can't provide more than half of their own support, meet the dependency test, citizenship test. You need a valid Social Security number for the child. That's also really important. So if you have all those elements and they qualify, you can claim the credit. Now the phase outs are also really important to remember here. So phase outs meaning the amount of the credit is going to be reduced if your income is above a certain threshold, and potentially reduced to zero, where you're not able to claim any credit amount at all. So for 2024, the phase outs for married filing joint taxpayers is if their AGI exceeds 400,000, and then it's 200,000 for all other filing statuses. In the example we're going to look at, we'll have a situation where the taxpayer has AGI in excess of the threshold, so there's a reduced credit amount. Now the amount of credit is reduced by $50 for every $1,000 their AGI exceeds the threshold. And so the way the math works there, right, if your AGI is 50,000 or more, then that CTC, if you're claiming for one child, it's not going to be available. All right, so let's look at the fact pattern. So we've got Jane Smith here filing as head of household with her son, Adam Smith, who is 10 years old at the end of the year. Now Adam meets the qualifying child test for the credit, so Jane's going to go ahead and claim him. And her AGI for the year, 201,305, so she's going to be just above the threshold, and so we'll get a look at how that credit amount is reduced. All right, so let's look at the 8812 and the 1040. So we'll start with page 1 of the 1040. Jane's got her information up top. She's filing as head of household, and we can see she's listed her son Adam as a dependent here, and she will be claiming the child tax credit, so box 4 is checked. Now her income, she's on a salary, her W-2 wages $195,000. She has a little bit of investment income there, taxable interest, and she has some capital gains for the year from the sale of stocks. So her total AGI, line 11, is 201,305. Right, and that's important because when we have a look at the 8812, we'll find that there's going to be a phase out on the CTC amount. All right, so we'll start up here, part 1, line 1. Enter the amount from line 11 of the 1040. So they're asking, enter the amount of our adjusted gross income as it was reported on page 1. And so we start with 201,305. Now there's some adjustments that potentially are made depending on what kind of additional filings you have. So if you have any income excluded from Puerto Rico, you would add those amounts back. If you're claiming the foreign earned income exclusion on the 2555, you have an adjustment for that amount. And then lastly, Form 4563 is filed if you're claiming exclusion, or if you're a resident of American Samoa and you're claiming exclusions there as well. In Jane's case here, she's a resident of Florida. None of those apply. So all of line 2 is just left blank for us. And so our total line 3 amount remains at 201,305. Now line 4, enter the number of qualifying children under 17 with the required SSN. Well, she has one dependent that is a qualifying child for purposes of this test, and so she's entered 1 on line 4. Line 5, multiply line 4 amount by $2,000 and report that figure on line 5. Now, number of dependents on line 6 here who are not under 17 or do not have the required Social Security number, this is the other dependent credit, right? So the child tax credit is the $2,000 amount. The other dependent credit is a reduced amount at $500. So if you have a dependent that let's say 18 years old, you would be claiming them as a dependent for this credit, but it would be the other dependent credit, the ODC amount, which is only $500 rather than the $2,000. In Jane's case here, she's only got the one dependent, so line 6 and line 7 are just left blank for us. All right. Now the phase out starts. So if we look at line 9, enter the amount per your filing status. So if you're married filing joint, you report $400,000. All other statuses, so single, head of household, you would report the $200,000 figure. Line 10 asks us to subtract line 9 from line 3. So we take the $200,000 figure, we subtract that from 201,305, and we're left with the difference, which is $1,305. Now, as noted also on line 10, you only enter in multiples of 1,000 and you round up. So if more than 0, not a multiple of 1,000, enter the next multiple of 1,000. For example, if you have 425, enter 1,000. If you have 1025, enter 2. In our case, we have 1,305 is the difference, so we're going to round up to the nearest thousandth, which is going to be $2,000, and that's what's entered here on line 10. Now line 11 asks us to multiply that line 10 amount by 5%, and we're left with $100. The $100 amount is going to be the reduction. All right. Now line 12 asks, is the amount on line 8 more than the amount on line 11? And the answer is yes, right? $2,000 is more than the amount on line 11 of 100. So we enter yes, right? Check this box, subtract line 11 from line 8, and we're left with $1,900, and the result is reported on line 12. So there's our $1,900. So what's happened here is we reduced the $2,000 credit that Jane was initially eligible for by $100 because her AGI exceeds that threshold of $200,000. Now, once you have the $1,900 figure, you have to do a test against the credit. You have to do the credit limit worksheet to test whether or not you have sufficient tax liability to be able to use this, right? Because remember, the child tax credit is initially a non-refundable credit, so you need taxes in order to offset. If you don't have enough taxes, then maybe you might be eligible for the additional child tax credit. But in this case, we're just working with the CTC. So the credit limit worksheet, you can find this in the 8812 instructions. We have the worksheet listed below the form here, so we'll take a quick look at that. Okay, so the credit limit worksheet, again, what we're doing here is we're testing to see whether we have sufficient tax liability and then making adjustments for other credits. So we'll start with the line 18 amount from our Form 1040, which is $33,839. So if I go back to the Form 1040, page 2, we can see our line 18 amount, the total tax liability, $33,839, based on our taxable income of $179,405. So we've got the $33,839, that's reported on line 1. And now we make some adjustments for other credits or adjustments that might have made or other credits that we might be claiming on the return. So we would have to apply those first before we take into account the child tax credit. So if you look at Schedule 3 of your Form 1040, you'll have things like, so line 1 is the foreign tax credit. Line 2 is the other dependent credit, or sorry, the child care and other dependent care credit. If we have a look, I have a sample Schedule 3 here. We can look at this. So this is Schedule 3, additional credits and payments. You could see the line items here, right? So line item 1 was the FTC. 2, credit for child and dependent care expenses on the 2441, education credits, and so on. So if you have any of these Schedule 3 amounts, you need to enter them here and subtract them first from your tax liability before we account for the child tax credit. Jane's got a pretty straightforward return here, so we don't have any Schedule 3 amounts, so that's why this figure is blank. Now that we have the 33,839, you move on to complete an additional credit limit worksheet B only if all of these following apply. So if you're claiming one of these credits, one or more, and you're also not filing the foreign earned income exclusion on 2555, and your line 4 amount is more than 0. Line 4 is the number of qualifying children that you're claiming for purposes of the CTC. Well, in Jane's case, she's not filing the 2555, and the line 4 amount on the 8812 is more than 0. It's 1. But she's not claiming any one of these 4 credits. And so for that reason, she doesn't have to complete worksheet B. We can skip over that, and we're just left with 33,839 as the final value for the credit limit worksheet. So we go back to line 13, enter the amount for worksheet A, 33,839, and on line 14, enter the smaller of line 12 or line 13. This is going to be the child tax credit and credit for other dependents if you have them. The smaller amount here is the $1,900, right? We have sufficient taxes on our taxable income to be able to use all the credit. So $1,900 is the CTC amount. So we can go back to our Form 1040 and report this figure on line 19. So we go back to the Form 1040. We see here on line 19, child tax credit or credit for other dependents, and that's pulled from 8812. And so there we report our $1,900 figure. So now, when we have a look at this, we can see, all right, we had $33,839 in tax liability on our taxable income. We're getting a credit for $1,900 to reduce our taxes owed to $31,939. So that's how the credit's being applied in Jane's case. So this does reduce overall her tax liability, but again, she's not getting the full $2,000. She's getting a reduced amount because her AGI exceeds those relevant thresholds. All right, so that covers it for this tutorial. Hope that was helpful. Thanks for watching and sticking through it to the end here with me. And as always, I appreciate it and look forward to seeing you on the next video. Thanks.